You ever have a morning where you think you know how the day's gonna go, maybe a little grief, a little family, a bit of quiet at the lake, and then out of nowhere it turns into the kind of legal showdown you'd expect to see in a season finale, except nobody told you you were a character? Yeah, that was the day everything in Whispering Pines changed. And not in some abstract, oh, the neighborhood will never be the same kind of way, but in a head on collision between power justice and the people who think they're untouchable. It started like these things always do, with somebody yelling, "Get off our property before I call the police." And I swear the sound cut through the still morning air like a chainsaw through Sunday silence. The voice belonged to Elaine Carriage. Ela for short, the sort of woman who wears a neon pink tracksuit at dawn and marches around as if the world owes her an apology. She was stomping across the wet grass, her arms flailing, zeroing in on my niece Sophie, who was knee-deep in the lake, clutching our father's ashes and whispering a quiet prayer. Elaine, of course, acted like Sophie was polluting the entire water supply by standing there grieving. But what Elaine didn't know, and what nobody in Whispering Pines knew yet, was that Sophie, who still looked lost and hollow-eyed from the last month of hospice and heartbreak, had just inherited more than this patch of land. Every drop of water in the lake, every trash route, every watt of electricity, every megabyte of internet for 100 miles, all of it now fell under her control. In less than 10 minutes, this woman in her bubblegum tracksuit was about to find out just how bad a mistake she'd made and why picking a fight at a funeral is maybe the worst possible life choice. Now, to really understand how we got here, let me back up a sec. My brother, Marcus, built Holloway Lake into a legacy, the kind of legacy that started with a 280-acre patch of land in 1923, handed down from our grandfather. Generations of family fishing campfires, all that Americana. Marcus was the kind of guy who never bragged about what he owned. You wouldn't see his name splashed across a billboard. But over the last 15 years, while most folks were worrying about rising property taxes and HOA fees, he was quietly acquiring every critical service in the region. Water, power, waste management, internet. You name it, he owned a piece. It wasn't about money for him. It was about leverage. And as we'd soon find out, about protecting this place and everyone in it from people exactly like Elaine. Sophie called me the night before, her voice trembling, asking if I'd take her to the lake for one last wish to scatter her dad's ashes right where he taught her to swim. I had no idea that honoring that wish would trigger the biggest reckoning Whispering Pines had ever seen. So there we were. Sophie at the edge of her childhood, me just trying to keep it together, and Elaine storming in, hollering about environmental violations, threatening to call the sheriff, the EPA, probably the president if she had the number. She had her phone out filming, looking for all the world like she was about to catch the scoop of the year. I watched as Sophie's grief shifted just a flicker at first into something sharper, calculating. You could practically see her switch, flipping grief to resolve sadness, to steel. Sophie didn't even raise her voice. She just said, "Ma'am, I'm curious about your mention of monitoring activities on private property. What kind of environmental stewardship gives you authority to survey land that doesn't belong to your HOA?" Elaine was caught off guard. There's nothing like having your bluff called by a girl holding an urn and a law degree's worth of polite questions. Elaine's face went red, then pale, then red again, doubling down, calling Sophie a trespassing vagrant, promising to get her arrested. Sophie just watched, calm as a surgeon. Then came the first twist. Sophie reached into her purse and pulled out a portfolio, one of those fancy leather ones you only see at court, or I guess when you're about to change the fate of a town. "Mrs. Carriage, before you make any more calls, you should know you've confessed to several federal crimes on camera," she said. "Cool as you please." Elaine sputtered, claimed wiretapping, but Sophie reminded her Montana's a one-party consent state. And oh, by the way, admitting to months of surveillance and illegal soil sampling. Yeah, that's not community service, that's fraud. It got better. Sophie started pulling up Elaine's own social media posts right there on her phone, pictures of her trespassing videos, bragging about keeping an eye on the lake. The evidence just piled up, and with every new piece, Elaine shrank another inch. That's when Sophie delivered the second twist, a bombshell, really. She calmly presented property records showing that Whispering Pines itself sat on land illegally rezoned through fake environmental impact studies. Your entire development, Sophie said, was built on federally protected wetlands. The color drained from Elaine's face. You could feel the shift, the realization that her threats meant nothing, that she wasn't the predator here but the prey. But Sophie was only warming up. She revealed the real inheritance controlling interest in the water company, the electric co-op, the internet provider, the waste management contractor. Every utility that made Whispering Pines tick, every service, every drop of water, every flush, every light bulb was now hers. Elaine looked like someone who just realized she'd been living in a house built on quicksand. And then the cavalry arrived, black SUVs and luxury sedans rolling up the drive, spitting out lawyers in suits, sharp enough to cut glass. At their head was Jackson Pierce, a legal juggernaut, briefcase in hand. Mrs. Carriage, he said, we've discovered fraud, embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy involving your development company, county officials, and a whole lot of money. The number $14 million in stolen federal funds. But the real kicker, $28 million in shell company payments directly to Elaine, all disguised as consulting fees. Pierce had the bank records, the wire transfers, the whole ugly trail. By this point, Elaine was barely upright. Sophie, meanwhile, was poised as ever, orchestrating a legal symphony that would bring down an empire. She told Elaine the FBI was on its way, that arrests would begin within 10 minutes, that all assets were being frozen, that this was her one chance at cooperation. Helicopters thundered in. Agent Morrison strode over, credentials flashing, and took Elaine into custody for conspiracy, fraud, and environmental crimes. But then came the revelation that flipped everything upside down. My brother Marcus, the man we thought was just a clever businessman, had spent the last 3 years as a federal informant, documenting every illegal transaction, every permit forged, every stolen dollar. He'd done it all while dying of cancer, working with the feds to make sure justice would outlast him. Elaine begged, said she had a family, a daughter, a husband who knew nothing. Sophie didn't waver. You had 3 years to come clean. You chose greed over honor, profit over protection, and you picked my father's funeral as the hill you wanted to die on. That was it. Justice, clean and cold. Then the residents started arriving, dozens of them, panic in their faces, pajamas under their coats, desperate for answers. Margaret Chin, the vice president, pleaded with Sophie. We didn't know. We just wanted homes for our families. Please don't take them away. And then, just to twist the knife, little Tommy Anderson, all of 8 years old, ran up sobbing. Please don't make us leave. My hamster's buried in the backyard. I promise we'll be good neighbors. One by one, the whole community knelt in the grass, pleading for mercy. It would have broken anyone's heart. Sophie stood there holding our father's ashes, the weight of 100 lives on her shoulders. She looked out at all of them, then down at the lake. Power without mercy is tyranny. But mercy without justice is meaningless, she said, her voice carrying across the water. Here's what she did, what I still can't believe. The real legacy wasn't just the land, the power, or the evidence. Marcus Holloway had created the Holloway Environmental Trust, a nonprofit that would take ownership of all the illegal land, turn it into a sustainable community, retrofit the houses, protect the environment. Nobody would lose their homes, but everyone would pay modest conservation fees, no more obscene property taxes, no more dirty deals. The community would become carbon neutral, serve as a living lab for environmental stewardship. Elaine's mansion would be torn down and replaced with a research academy training the next generation so nothing like this could ever happen again. And that kid Tommy, his backyard and his hamster, Mr. Whiskers, would be safe forever, part of the most beautiful conservation area in Montana. As federal agents led Elaine away, neighbors cheered, some crying, some hugging. Sophie walked to the lake, scattered the last of her father's ashes, and whispered, "Your final case is closed and justice won." The sun broke through, the lake shimmered gold, and in that moment it felt like everything had come full circle. Now maybe you think mercy and justice can't walk hand in hand, but I saw it happen right here with my own eyes. And if you've ever wondered what you'd do holding that kind of power, well, maybe ask yourself what kind of legacy you want to leave behind. Let's hear your thoughts with Sophie. Right? Should mercy win over punishment? And what would you have done if you held the fate of a whole community in your hands? Go on, share your take, because the story of Whispering Pines isn't over, not by a long shot.